Welcome everybody back to our World War II We Can Still Dream webinar this Friday evening. And I'm super excited about this one. So a lot of you have heard of Chuuk or Chuuk Lagoon, arguably the best place for World War II shipwreck diving. So it's a fantastic destination to talk about to begin with. But we have Brandy Mueller. She has a book out, The Airplane Graveyard. She's also one of the captains for the Odyssey out on Chuuk Lagoon. So a wealth of knowledge, a lot of stories, a lot of history. And I'm very, very honored to have her here to share with us today. So Brandy, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is really exciting. And it's especially important on the eve of D-Day. What a great time to talk about Chuuk Lagoon and World War II. And while the invasion of Normandy was happening over in Europe and Operation Hailstone was in the Pacific theater, I think there's some nice parallels between the two in that they were both sort of the turning of the tide in World War II for the Allies as far as big successes that helped change things in their favor. So my name's Brandy Miller. I'm one of the captains on the Odyssey, also a scuba instructor, underwater photographer, and writer. I studied seagrass in undergrad and have a master's degree from the University of Hawaii. And I've worked out in Chuuk for just over 3 years. I spend about 6 months there each year. And prior to working there, I was actually on the boat as a guest and fell in love with the boat and the wrecks pretty much, and sort of begged the owners over the years, if you ever need anybody, call me. So I finally got out there working, which is fantastic. As a disclaimer, I am a diver first and only a hobbyist historian. So I will do my best to have all of my facts straight, but if I do anything wrong, I apologize in advance. It's interesting, even some of the books that we read about Chuuk Lagoon, they argue with each other about certain things. So definitely happy to discuss afterwards any points that were right or wrong. But after I went to Chuuk, I became a complete wreck junkie. When I first went there, I wasn't even really that into wrecks. I just wanted to go because it was supposed to be this big diver bucket list destination. And I got there, and then I spent most of the last years chasing World War II wrecks all over the place. I worked in Kwajalein Atoll, which was Operation Flintlock, which was about 2 weeks before Operation Hailstone. So there's lots of Japanese wrecks there, as well as a bunch of American airplanes that were dumped after the war. I made it out to Bikini and Corone and the Solomons, all over the place. So I definitely have a bit of a wreck obsession. But to start with, the first question people usually ask is, where the heck is Chuuk? It's in the middle of nowhere, and it takes a really long time to get to, but I promise once you get there, it is totally worth it, and you'll already be planning your trip back once you finish your first week there. Generally, United Airlines is the only way to get there, and you can fly easiest from either Los Angeles or Honolulu to Guam, and then it's about an hour and 20-minute flight back from Guam. There's a fun United flight known as the Island Hopper that island hops from many islands in the Pacific, which is sort of fun, I guess. I'm not a fan of it. I would say don't do it, but a lot of people like to check the box that they rode the Island Hopper. And in normal times, every other day, the flight goes from Honolulu to Guam, but stops in Majuro, Kwajalein, Koh Sarai, Ponape, Chuuk, and Guam. And then the next day it goes back. So if you really want an airplane adventure, you can take that, but only take it once. After once, you'll be more than done with it. It adds on a couple of hours, but you do get to stop and see some of the other lesser known islands in the Pacific. But yeah, generally, it usually takes more than 24 hours to get to Chuuk. It's a long flight, so you should probably just plan 2 weeks in advance to go there because it's amazing, but definitely worth the United flight to get there. I've got another map. This shows a little bit more with the other islands listed. It's only about an hour and 20-minute flight from Guam. It's close to Palau. It's about 4 hours from the Philippines to Guam, so you're closer to that. But you are in the northern Pacific, but quite close to the equator. So we have pretty great weather, and it's quite beautiful. I've also got a map of the lagoon, and you can see that there's this lovely ring reef around the atoll, which is great. It was great for the Japanese. It totally makes sense why they chose this as one of their main bases, because this outer ring reef really protects everything in the lagoon. So year round, we have generally calm waters. And the Japanese were also really smart that they had all of their ships anchored in very protected places. So even if it is kind of storming, we can usually find an island to hide behind. And there's also a wreck there because the Japanese were doing the same thing. So you can kind of see where some of the wrecks are. I know it's pretty small, but those red stars are where some of the wrecks are. So they're generally close together. We don't do any long overnight movements or anything with the boat. Usually 2 hours is the max, and most of the time it's much shorter than that, but very easy to get around, and lots of wrecks all in a very close area. I know one thing, I go back and forth saying Chuuk versus Chuuk. So why is that? It used to be Chuuk, basically because the islands have this long succession of different countries occupying and owning them. So for a while it was Spanish, and then it was German. The Japanese were actually gifted these islands as well as many other Pacific islands after World War II. And they were supposed to protect them and take care of them, and they were not supposed to build giant military bases on them, but that of course is exactly what they did. But when the Germans, the story is that when the Germans owned Chuuk, they set it as Chuuk. So it became Chuuk Lagoon, and it stayed as Chuuk Lagoon through the war, and until the islands took back their independence in 1986. So in 1986, they became the Federated States of Micronesia. It's one of 4 states that are part of the SFM. The FSM. It's Yap, Chuuk, Pohnpei, and Coast Rice. And so they took the proper spelling and pronunciation of their islands back after that. So unfortunately, anytime that you're reading about World War II or talking about it, it's Chuuk Lagoon, but now it's properly said Chuuk. So I tend to just go back and forth between the two because not many people know where Chuuk Lagoon is, and even less know where Chuuk is. So when we're talking about it in a war context, we usually bring back Chuuk just to help reduce some of the confusion. So why do we dive here? Well, for one, as you can see, it's quite pretty. Lovely Micronesian destination. We have beautiful blue waters, lovely green islands. The water is generally warm year-round, 82 to 84. Very little current, calm conditions. Again, that outer ring reef really protects the area. So it's really easy and very good diving just from that aspect. And then, of course, it's an underwater museum. All of these ships were sunk, and they are spectacular to dive. They weren't sunk. A lot of us dive artificial wrecks before we get to dive war wrecks, and those wrecks have all been cleaned up, which is great, makes them easy to swim through and things like that. But these wrecks were all sunk during war, and everything that was on them in 1944 is, for the most part, still on them now. So you can swim through these wrecks and see beer and sake bottles and bolts of clothing that were used to make uniforms for the men, and china, and sometimes we find really cool things like light bulbs or like pen and ink sets and medicine bottles. It's endless, and it's like this moment of time that's frozen that we can now go and dive, which is pretty phenomenal. For me, it's like a real life history lesson. I never really cared much about World War II history in high school, but as soon as I dive a wreck, I just want to know everything about how it ended up there, what it was doing before that. So it's sort of like an added bonus to the amazing diving that we do whenever we can do that. So really lovely place to dive. And the next question is, how did all these wrecks end up down there? So Operation Hailstone was February 17th through 18th, 1944. Chuuk Lagoon was the main Pacific base for the Imperial Japanese Navy. It was strategically located in the Pacific, so there you had sort of Japan and then Chuuk and then lots of other islands around there. And again, it was a very protected lagoon. It was a great place to set up a base. And the base was quite extensive. There was a seaplane base, there was multiple airstrips, there's a submarine base, there was a repair anchorage, several different fleets. There was a lot going on. They had definitely built up the space quite extensively. And there's some comparisons between Pearl Harbor, both in how the base was. It was this big base, and it was a strategic base. So for the Allies to win, the Americans to win this was definitely a very big win for them. And of course, the battle was also a bit of a retaliation for Pearl Harbor in that it was a big win for the Americans. For the most part, we believe that the Japanese were caught mostly off guard by the battle. Most likely they thought that the Americans would attack sort of by water or by land. And again, that ring reef is interesting because there's only so many entrances into the lagoon that are broken up between all those islets and islands. So those areas were probably mined. They had different cannons we can still see on the islands that would have been protecting those openings. So they were prepared for that, but they weren't prepared for this massive airstrike that the Americans brought out. So over 500 airplanes from 5 different carriers were involved. They came off the USS Enterprise, the Yorktown, the Essex, the Intrepid, and the Bunker Hill. And they started first thing in the morning, kind of caught the Japanese off guard, and they went straight for the airfield at Ettin Island. Basically, they were able to destroy almost all of their airplanes before they even realized what was happening. So with all those airplanes destroyed, very few got off the runway, and there was very few planes fighting back during the battle. So overall, there was 12 Japanese warships that were sunk and 32 merchant ships. So definitely a very successful win for the Americans. I have a little video for you. I won't show it all, but this is one of the
Your commentator is Lyle Van. The most effective United States carrier-borne air armada ever sent into action prepares a surprise blow against the powerful Japanese naval base at Chuuk. Bombers, torpedo planes, and Hellcat fighters stand ready for the takeoff as their 2,000 horsepower engines warm up. The fleet is close to the enemy's secret stronghold now and still undetected. The first flight moves to the attack. The exact number of carriers in this great fleet is a closely guarded naval secret, but an overwhelming force of planes roars into the sky, the finest planes and the greatest flyers in the world. There goes the spearhead of the attack. The defending Japs are stunned by the suddenness of the first blow delivered with crushing force on the heart of the great fortress in mid-Pacific. Like Hitler's Europe, Tojo just forgot to put a ceiling over Chuuk, and jubilant Navy cameramen take pictures to prove it.
All right, so I'm just going to mute that for now. This is available on YouTube, and it's also public domain. So if you want to watch the whole thing, it's on Wiki Commons and YouTube as well. It's kind of interesting. This is footage of the ships that are being shot down that you actually get to dive in truck. So I find that just fascinating. As I mentioned before, the Japanese, for the most part, were completely caught off guard. There is some speculation that the Japanese had a bit of an idea that maybe something was coming, because scout planes had showed photos of several large warships that were moved out just a couple days before the battle. So some people think that maybe the Japanese saw those scout planes and sort of were like, ooh, maybe we should move our big guys out. Or perhaps just they had all these big ships and all these smaller ships all in this, one place at one time. So maybe they were just moving them out routinely. But it was unfortunate that there were some big warships that had moved out just a couple days before the Americans attacked. And for the Americans, there was very minor loss. I believe it was only 7 planes, American planes, that went down. And what's really interesting about that is that up until last sort of fall, winter time, none of those planes had been found. And there's a project called Project Recovery that found 3 of them just recently. So hopefully I'll get to dive those sometime soon. But they found 2 SPD Dauntlesses and 1 Avenger, the American plane. So that is pretty spectacular. So this is the Odyssey. I'm a bit biased, but it is a fabulous way to spend a week diving in Chuuk Lagoon. She's 132 feet long. We take 16 passengers max, and we have 9 state cabins. One thing that's nice is we have 2 single cabins that don't have an extra surcharge or anything. So the first 2 people who want a single cabin can have them if you don't want to share with another diver or anything like that. We do have a very spacious dive deck on the back. We fully support tech diving as well. We are set up to do rebreathers. We've got trimix, we've got O2 on board. We can mix whatever blends you want. But we can also do a normal recreational diver, and that's actually mostly what we do. But Chuuk is really great. I know one of the sort of fallacies that you hear is that, oh, Chuuk wrecks, they're too deep. I don't want to go that deep or whatnot. But there's actually lots of different profiles you can dive. So if you are in advanced open water and you don't want to go past 100 feet, you can have a spectacular week diving all the wrecks that will dive and staying above 100 feet and still seeing really amazing stuff. Or if you're a tech diver who wants to spread their wings and do a 3-hour rebreather dive, we have the capabilities to do that as well. So basically, whatever kind of diver you are, you will really enjoy Chuuk if you come out there. These are some of our staterooms. We can do sort of the 1 bed or 2 single beds. We have ensuite bathrooms, lots of storage facilities in there. One thing that I really like is there's room under the beds to put your suitcase, so nobody takes your suitcase away from you. You can always, you know, store your stuff that you don't think you need, but then you decide on the 3rd day that you really did need, just under your bed. That's nice. Also, our dining room and bar area, we have it's all windows. It's great. You can take in the sights while you're dining. Nice area there too. And of course, the highlight. Where's my video? I think the highlight. We have an elevator on the boat. I mean, who doesn't want to ride an elevator on a boat? Basically, the platform's at about 4 feet. You just step right onto it, grab onto the handles, signal that you're good, and our crew will beam you up Scotty to the dive deck, take your fins off. Really great if you have any back problems, or if you don't want to have back problems in the future. It's quite nice. It's also really great for our tech divers, especially if you've got side mount and stage bottles and whatnot on. It helps take off the big impact of jumping in with lots of tanks. But we do have a traditional ladder as well if you must go old school, but the elevator is quite nice. So now I'm going to switch into some of the wrecks that we dive out in Chuuk and show you some videos and some photos of those. I'm going to start with the Fumitzuki. This is a fairly unique wreck in that it was a Japanese destroyer. The majority of the ships that were sunk in Chuuk were merchant vessels that were requisitioned into the Imperial Navy. Basically, they took all the ships they could. So there's luxury cruise liners that they converted into warships. But the Fumitzuki was an actual warship built for the war, and also built for speed and for, doing the job that you do in war. One cool thing about this ship is that with nothing on it, it can go up to 39 knots, which is incredibly fast for technology. I mean, it's been underwater 76 years, so 80, 85 years ago. And the Fumitzuki has an interesting story that it was actually in the repair anchorage when the battle started, and both of its engines were torn apart, and the engineers managed to get one of the engines up and running, and they made a run for North Pass to get out of the lagoon. And there's some really cool aerial footage where you can see the wake behind the boat, sort of in a lightning pattern zigzag, because they were hoping to not get hit by bombs from airplanes. They made it about 5 miles, which I think is a pretty gallant effort, but now it is underwater. It's one of our sites that has generally really good visibility. We see eagle rays. It sits upright for the most part, but the very bow section has broken off in recent years. I actually think it's kind of a cool thing because it sort of opened up an area that probably no one had been in before, that you can kind of poke your head in and see what was going on there. And you can really see when you compare your dive on the Fumitzuki to some of the other ships of how small this one is. There's some bathrooms towards the stern that are just this tiny little room that I don't even know how anyone could fit into it. But of course, it wasn't built for comfort. Another fun story about the Fumitzuki is that some divers found a box, and the diver urban legend is that they were hoping the box was going to be filled with the captain's money and gold. So they blew it up, which we all highly recommend no one does anymore. And they found out it was just a toolbox. So they found some spanners, and now it's placed down at the stern. And it makes for a great photo op. You've got the wrenches out, and you get the shadow of the Fumitzuki in the background. This little anemone fish lived here for years. I didn't see him last year, but maybe another one will come and take its place. But yeah, fun little story on the Fumitzuki. There's only 2 destroyers in the lagoon. The other one is the WWII, which is a lot deeper. It's about 210 feet. And it's also broken completely into 2 pieces. So this is actually the better one to dive. and it's in better depths. I don't know if I said this already, but it's about 130 in the sand at the max depth. It starts about 80 feet. So we just usually do one dive on this one and check it out. The next wreck I'm going to talk about is the Shinkoku Maru. This is one of the favorites right now, and also probably the wreck with the most marine life growth at the moment. I think over the years it kind of changes between wrecks, but right now the Shinkoku is just draped in pinks and purple soft coral. There's sea fans, there's more anemones in one area than probably anywhere else on Earth. Really, really beautiful wreck. And I call it the name your own adventure wreck because it also has one of the best engine room tours in the lagoon. It was an oiler, and it was actually struck right in the engine room from the side hull of the ship. And you can enter the engine room from that hole. So basically our dive guides will take you to 130 feet, which is where this torpedo hole is, or possibly aerial bomb, but a big hole in the ship. And they'll take you in, and basically it circles you up through the engine room. You see the generators and the boilers and different rooms in the engine room. And you kind of come out to a point where you can see the skylights up above you, and they'll either take you out the skylights or they'll continue to take you on a tour inside the wreck of the stern superstructure. There's a galley area, some bathrooms and all kinds of stuff to see. So if you like pretty marine life, you can stay on the outside and see all this lovely soft corals. We get lots of batfish. Also usually schools of fusiliers are swimming by, or you can go deep, dark, and rusty and check out the engine room and the interior parts of the ship. We also have some resident leopard sharks, which are really actually called zebra sharks, but they tend to be commonly called leopard sharks. But these guys live at the bow of the boat. Almost every time we dive it, we see at least one, sometimes a couple of them. And they're generally pretty friendly. You can usually, if you go slowly from the side, you can get quite close to them. If you dive bomb them, they get scared and they swim away. But usually you can have some pretty good photo opportunities with these guys. And again, lots of coral, lots of fish. It's a very, very pretty wreck. One still on the Shinkoku. The Shinkoku has an interesting story in that it was struck and sunk in the middle of the night. And this was quite a big feat for that time, in that normally at dark the battles would end, because how is the airplane going to find the ship in the dark? And when you're swimming inside the Shinkoku, you'll see that all the portholes are closed. So they were in blackout conditions, you know, no light was being emitted from the ship. So the Americans shouldn't have been able to see it to shoot it down. And this was probably the first time that the use of airplane radar was used to sink a ship. The Japanese didn't know that the Americans had that capability yet. So pretty fantastic that that was able to happen technologically wise. So interesting story for the Shinkoku. Another one of my favorite wrecks. In the end, I actually call them all my favorite wrecks. I'm sorry, they're all amazing. I have different parts of the wrecks that are my favorites. My favorite part of the Nippo is the wheelhouse. It still has a very intact wheelhouse with this telegraph that's in this photo, as well as a steering station, which I'll show you in a second. The Nippo Maru was a water transport ship, and you can see these big cube structures in some of the cargo holds that were used to transport water. And it always makes me laugh because when you dive on all of these wrecks, you will find piles and piles of beer and sake bottles everywhere. So it's good to know that they drank water as well, and not just the beer that we see in a lot of places on almost all the ships. But when you think about it, water was dangerous. I mean, how quickly you can contaminate water with some sort of bacteria that would make the soldier sick or something. It was way safer to drink beer. So, you know, sounds good to me. Also a picture of the engine room. The Nippo has a really nice engine room. It is one of the smaller and deeper engine rooms, so not necessarily a dive for everyone to go into that part of the wreck. But again, all these wrecks have multi-profiles and different things that whatever you want to do based on your experience and whatnot, you have the opportunity, and you will still enjoy it no matter what you do. This is that wheelhouse. You've got, I always think he looks like eyes, but this was the steering station. And it's pretty amazing that this metal ring is still there, which would have held the wooden spokes of the wheel together. So the wood is disintegrated, but the metal ring is still there. And it does actually move, but I highly request that no one touches these things because eventually at some point they're going to break. But it is amazing that all of this stuff is still there. So best to not touch anything, and that way the next divers who show up will still be able to enjoy it. Or when you come back for your second trip, you'll still be able to enjoy it. Again, this is my favorite wheelhouse. I love how you can get the blue ambient light in the background. We usually get quite good viz here. I think I've got another little video. Lots of marine life on this one. We see a lot of gas masks. Hold number 1 has a lot of gas masks as well as bullets. Also, this is cordite, so it kind of looks like spaghetti strands, but used to pack the shells. It's cordite. Really lovely mast. Also, that mast is covered, you can't really see it from there, but it's covered in coral. A tank, big tank on this one. Type 95 Hago light tank. 3 men fit in that tank. It's hard to tell like the size in the video, but it's a very small tank when you think about putting 3 people in it, but it's a very big tank when you're swimming next to it. And beer bottles. And this is in the wheelhouse. Areas like this wheelhouse, we kind of make like a one-way path so that divers aren't sort of coming in and going out, but there's a room below it that you can swim into and then go up a hatchway, and then you end up right in the back of the wheelhouse, so you can get that great photo. And the last thing there was howitzer guns, which are on the deck towards the stern of the ship. So that was the Nippo. The Fujikawa Maru is one of the iconic wrecks of Chuuk. I feel like this is our mascot. This is R2D2. He's actually an air compressor, and he's probably the only air compressor to have multiple magazine cover photos from magazines all over the world. He's a very, very charismatic little air compressor. And he lives in the machine shop of the Fujikawa Maru. This is usually a highlight in place that people want to go. Also, the telegraph on the bow is quite nice. They've cleaned it up so you can still see the writing. So make fast and let go anchor. You can see, it's hard to see in this photo, but you can see that it was manufactured by whichever company. It's where you're like iceberg ahead and you pull, not really. But. The Fujikawa also has a cargo hold of airplane parts. It was anchored very close to Etten Island, which was the main airfield during World War II. And most likely all these airplane parts were going to be offloaded onto the runway in the airport area soonish. It didn't quite make it to that, but makes for an amazing cargo hold for us to swim through. It's mostly Japanese Zeros that are in the cargo hold. There's fuselages, there's wings, there's all kinds of propeller blades. And then there's one plane, which is the one in this photo, that's a little bit different. It's actually a Claude airplane, which was the predecessor to the Zero. And it's really interesting that there was a Claude in there as well, because it was kind of outdated technology. So some of the hypotheses are that maybe they were running low on airplanes, so they were just sort of taking every airplane they could get, or also that sort of Japanese kamikaze mentality where airplanes were used as weapons, so it didn't necessarily matter what kind of an airplane it was at this point if it was just going to be used as a weapon. It is fairly identifiable. It has the number 39 on the tail, and unfortunately about a year ago the tail actually broke off, so now it's very recognizable. We don't know exactly why the tail broke off. I know some people had complained that maybe a diver did it, but I was actually there, and the week before we dove it and it was fine, and then a tropical storm went through, and then the week after we dove it and it was broken off. So I am pretty sure that it was actually the tropical storm that created the water movement that then caused the tail to break. But there are things that are changing. These wrecks have been underwater for 76 years. So definitely if it's on your bucket list, put it high up on your bucket list, because things are changing as time goes on. It's amazing how much stuff is still there now. And I mean, 20, 30 years from now, there's still going to be so much to dive. But definitely some of the swim throughs and some of the engine room tours may or may not still be doable as time goes on. So bump it up on your bucket list. Come out and see us. Yeah, so the Hoki Maru is another wreck with an interesting story. The Hoki was actually a New Zealander ship, the Haraki, and it was captured by the Japanese near the Coral Sea. And when the Japanese took over, the ship had a little bit different style engines than the Japanese were used to, so they needed the New Zealanders to keep the ship running and get it up to Singapore, where they were going to put it in dry dock. Being the cheeky fellows that Kiwis are, they actually sabotaged the ship. They threw parts overboard, they fixed things wrong, and ended up, it took a very long time for the ship to get where it was going. And once it got there, it was highly in disrepair. So some of those men apparently ended up in POW camps, which is sad, but on the flip side, some of them survived and were able to tell us about their antics. So interesting story there. And this is another wreck that has lots and lots of soft coral. We commonly see eagle rays and sharks on this dive, big schools of batfish, and it has my favorite cargo hold, which is this one. It has a cargo hold completely full of construction equipment and trucks. There's a bulldozer, there's a steamroller, there's a tractor, all these trucks. In the bottom picture, you can see sort of this rolled up mesh that was used in airport runway construction. And again, still, it's amazing how intact this stuff is. The wheels are still there, pedals, some of all kinds of stuff. So really interesting to see there. But again, if going into cargo holds isn't your thing, you can spend your time on the outside of this wreck and see all this beautiful coral and anemones and eagle rays swimming by. So again, you can come out and see us and do whatever you're comfortable with and see what you're interested in and really enjoy your trip. Also with the Hoki is that it was carrying aviation fuel. So when it was struck, the Americans noted that it was a massive explosion. And the ship sort of ends about midship. So as you're swimming along, the ship just sort of cuts off like a wall. And when you look down in the sand, the hull of the ship has completely splayed open and is flat like a pancake on the seafloor. You can see the hull, what's it called, in the ship. Anyways, you can see that it's completely spread open from this massive explosion. And then if you make a long swim up to where the bow is, the actual pointy bit in forecastle sits perfectly upright, which again, I know I say I find everything amazing, but I find that amazing that this massive explosion could have happened, but the very pointy bit is still intact, and then the second half of the ship is still intact, and these trucks and things are in this cargo hold that are still intact, like just mind-blowing. You can also see the forward mast is out in front of the sand a couple 100 feet away as well. So very cool to see that wreck too. I'm going to call this my macro intermission. Again, there's something for everyone in truck. There's plenty of macro life if you change your gaze into the smaller stuff. All this marine life is there if you look for it. We get lots and lots of anemones of all sorts of different colors. And of course, to have anemone fish, you have to have anemone eggs. So anemone fish lay their eggs just at the base of the anemone. So if you look hard enough, you can usually find some anemone eggs. As they get bigger, you can see their eyes, which I think is cool. We get lots of blennies. Back on the Fujikawa, which I was talking about earlier, there's a king post that comes up to 15 feet. That is the perfect safety stop location. In one dive on my safety stop, I found over 7 species of blennies just hanging out during my stop. Lots of gobies, lots of juvenile fish. We get angelfish and Moorish idols. Also bigger stuff, we get some turtles, we get the sharks and eagle rays. Lots and lots of fish if you choose to change your wide angle wreck perspective into the smaller stuff. Nudibranchs and flatworms too, if you look for them. All right, but back to the big stuff. The Rio de Janeiro Maru was one of the luxury cruise liners, and it's a massive ship. It is sitting on its side. It has gigantic propellers and lots of stuff to explore on this one. And this is one of the ones too, that whole hull, 400 some feet long, is just this hard coral. I mean, it's a wreck, but it's a reef, and you can just, squint and pretend it's not a wreck and just think that you're swimming over a really nice hard coral reef if you don't like wrecks. Here's a little video. So again, this was a luxury cruise liner, and it's on its side, but this would have been one of those companionways, like maybe you play shuffleboard or like set your chairs and relax and watch the ocean go by. But the light coming down from the top would have been the windows and the companionway. So I always figure that if I was going to be in the Japanese Navy, I would want to be on this ship and not on the Fumitzuki. This has nice open spaces, probably a little bit nicer living quarters, but a very, very pretty ship. And then where this video is going to end, you can actually go down and the dive guides will take you through this sort of maze of the ship, and you can get down into a ballroom, and there's an area with some china and lots of different swim-throughs if you're so inclined. It has a really nice engine room. This is two of the telegraphs from the engine room. It also has a massive gauge panel that is just huge. Again, it's a huge ship, so it makes sense that there was a lot of switches and gauges necessary for its operation. And also another one of my favorite cargo holds is what we call the wine cellar or the bottle room. And there's one cargo hold in the Rio that is all beer bottles in wooden boxes. So again, when the ship was upright, the whole bottom of the hold would have been just wooden boxes of beer. But now that it's on its side, it's this amazing wall that's great for photos and just lots and lots of beer bottles. Another one of the cruise liners was the Heian Maru. And this one is also sitting on its side, similar to the Rio. And the Heian is the largest ship that is still underwater in Chuuk. There was one ship that was longer, which was the only ship that was salvaged. So this one is 510 feet, and it's also massive. It's got two humongous propellers and lots of stuff to see. A really neat engine room. It is an engine room where you sort of go in one place and you come back out that place. So definitely want to have a dive guide to take you through there. Also some fun artifacts. This is a medical kit up in the corner. There's still syringes, bottles that have different colored liquid in them. Some sort of a notebook, either, I don't know if it was like telling the doctor what to do or just a doctor's notebook. But it's really cool that this stuff still exists. And it really goes back to Chuuk making it illegal to salvage artifacts early on when divers started coming in. They did a really good job with that. And up until recently, the airport didn't even have X-ray capabilities, so they actually hand searched your luggage. So if you took anything, they would find it. And there is fines and possible jail time. I heard jail isn't as nice as the Odyssey, so I wouldn't suggest trying to take anything and ending up there. But yeah, it's really amazing that this stuff is still here for divers throughout the years. Also in the Heian, interesting little bunk bed room, some urinals. Another thing you'll become obsessed with is the bathrooms. Every ship had to have bathrooms, so you'll find sinks. We also find the Japanese bathtubs that are all little white tiles. You can still see some of the faucets and the knobs and things. Quite cool. Another photo from the engine room as well in the top right corner. And another little video. The Heian, they clean off where the words are written on the ship as well as kanji characters. So that's a nice photo op. And the Heian was a submarine tender, and these are spare periscopes that they were transporting. So that's quite cool. And you're in the similar spot right now is that companionway that I showed you in the Rio in the last one. The ship is on its side, but they must have been storing these super long periscopes in that sort of companion walkway. So now they're here underwater. Also interesting, when you come to Chuuk, there's two different sizes of these periscopes. There's a big one and there's also a really little one. And someone told me that they used the bigger ones when they were further away, and then the smaller ones when they got closer, because the smaller one would make less of a wake. So it was less likely for the ship to spot the little periscope sticking up. So the San Francisco Maru is sort of the Everest of wrecks in Chuuk Lagoon. This wreck is known as the $1 million wreck because it probably had more than $1 million worth of stuff on it when it went down. And it's a pretty amazing wreck. This is one of our deeper wrecks, and we do it as an optional dive on the last day. For those who don't want to go this steep, we have another wreck as well, so you don't miss out on any dives. But for those who do want to see this one, we do it on the last day. The top deck is 165 feet, and the shallowest point of the mast is about 90. It has 3 of these tanks on it, and the other 2 are just on the other side of the ship. Also, a very lovely bow gun. This ship was chock full of high explosives. The first cargo hold is full of hemispherical landmines. The second cargo hold has aerial bombs and depth charges. And as you work your way back to the stern, there's a cargo hold that is just mountains of bullets. There's long lance torpedoes, basically all kinds of stuff that goes boom. And it's amazing that the ship didn't completely get obliterated when it was shot down, because had it been hit any other place, it probably would have. And the ship was hit directly in the engine room. So the only place that there wasn't any high explosives. So kind of the miracle ship that it's still intact, and pretty amazing ship to dive. You can see the hemispherical landmines are down in the bottom right-hand corner. There are aerial bombs is the other lower photo, and then up in the top corner is a long lance torpedo and a pair of binoculars that someone has set on them. Also in the second cargo hold, there are 2 trucks. We think they were some sort of water or liquid transporting trucks. The sort of back container on them looks like it would have transported liquid, so maybe fuel movement or possibly like fire truck. We don't really know, but 2 very intact trucks on that wreck as well. There's some airplanes. I really like airplanes, so they're my favorite. One of the main airplanes that we usually dive in a normal charter is the Betty Bomber, which is the 2 photos. The black and white photo on the bottom is the Betty Bomber, and then the one with the bannerfish. It's only in about 60 feet of water, and it's in an area with lots of reef, so it makes for a nice dive. Check out the plane and then go check out some of the reef area as well. The other propeller blades that you see is a Jill airplane. That one's in about 130 feet of water close to Etten Island, which is also, the Betty Bomber is also close to Etten Island, but they're sort of on opposite sides of the island. This is what the Betty Bomber looked like above water. And this is what it looks like underwater. It's a nice big airplane. The wingspan was a little bit less than 80 feet across. The 2 engines were blown off the front. We think maybe it had like a water landing, but you can swim out to them and check out the 2 engines as well. You can swim through the inside of the plane. Sometimes there's all these lovely little glass fish in there. Makes for a fun little swim through. Really neat airplane. And some other airplanes. The over-under shot is a Japanese Zero, also close to Etten Island. And then the black and white photo, that one's kind of interesting because for a long time, everyone thought that it was another Jill airplane, but someone actually showed with some research that it's actually a Mert. It is actually a Nakajima, oh no, I'm sorry, a Nakajima C6N Mert. Anyway, that one sits just off Blue Lagoon, also a very neat airplane to check out. I'm nearing the end, but I've got a couple more wrecks I just want to show you that are sort of the optional wrecks that we sometimes dive. Of course, in a 7-day charter, we can't dive all of the wrecks. And it's amazing. You could spend days on some of these wrecks and still have more to see. I've been there for 3 years now, and I still find new things. So you can spend lots of times on every wreck. But usually we do 2 or 3 wrecks a day. And there's some that we sort of, if we've got guests who are coming back who've already been there, we'll try to sneak in a different wreck. However, the Momokawa Maru is my favorite wreck. So if I'm captaining, most likely we'll go to this one. This is my favorite. The Momokawa isn't a sister ship of the Nippo Maru, but it's a very similar type of ship. So it has this nice engine room. It has a very nice wheelhouse. It has a steering station just like the Nippo did, also the telegraph and speaking tubes. And the ship was used pre-war for transporting timber. So the cargo holds were extended. So they're these big, giant cargo holds, and there's some truck frames in them. There's some airplane parts. Also, there's some lanterns still in this wreck. Also, a really nice engine room. This one's a little small and a little bit deeper, but if you're into that kind of thing, it's a very nice engine room to see. This is also the only wreck that I've ever seen a manta on. We do get mantas, but not very often. Usually we see far more eagle rays and sharks and things, but probably also why this is one of my favorite wrecks, because I got to see the manta. But this is the propeller down at the stern of the Momokawa. Another one that we sometimes do is the Amagisan Maru. This is another wreck that's really lovely, really big, and I really like how it sits at this like partial angle. It makes for a great photo here, how you get out in front of it and get the shadow. It has an officer's car in it. That's kind of neat. Also, this is the galley, got sort of a stove, rice cooker going on in the Amagisan. And another one that we occasionally do is the I-169 submarine. A lot of people dive this one, and the dive isn't all that exciting, but the historical significance of the submarine is very exciting. The I-169 was actually outside of Pearl Harbor when Pearl Harbor was attacked. It was ready to take any ships that were exiting the harbor. And then when it went to leave Pearl Harbor, it found that they were stuck. They didn't really know quite how they were stuck, but they couldn't move the submarine. And they'd gone so far as to done the last dinner. They'd burned all the important papers, and they were sort of ready to scuttle the submarine when the captain must have done one more Hail Mary to try to get out, and did manage to break free of whatever they were stuck in. And the Americans later found that it must have been they were stuck in the minefield, and that some of the chains from the mines had been broken. So very lucky to escape that time. However, not so lucky a couple years later in Chuuk Lagoon. The submarine actually didn't go down during Operation Hailstone. It went down in April, just almost 2 months later. And even though the Americans had won Operation Hailstone, they didn't want the Japanese to, rebuild up the base or anything like that. So they sporadically sent air raids over kind of just whenever. So with my poetic licensing, an air raid had come up, and someone must have been like, dive, dive, dive. And when the submarine dove, they hadn't closed all the hatches, so the submarine was not able to get back up. And this type of submarine at the time could last about 24 hours underwater before it had to come up. So about a day and a half later, someone had noticed at the submarine base that the I-169 hadn't come up yet. And they sent divers down to check it out, and they saw that it was flooded. And unfortunately, well, at the time, not unfortunate yet, but they could hear the tapping of the sailors in one part. So they tried everything they could to try to get the sailors out and try to refloat the submarine, but they weren't able to. And after that, then the Japanese depth charged the submarine because they didn't want the Americans to get the technology or whatever of the submarine. So when you dive it, it's kind of a lot of mangled metal, but it is a very historically significant submarine, and quite a cool dive. It's a little bit deeper. It's about 140 at its max depth, probably about 80, 90 feet at its shallowest point. And I think it's the only Japanese submarine underwater. So sometimes we do that if people are interested. And then some people come back from the dive and they loved it. And some people are like, oh, it was a big hunk of metal underwater. But definitely a cool wreck if you're into that kind of stuff. So I'm almost done, but I want to circle back again to, it's not all wreck diving. I mean, it is all wreck diving, but it's these wrecks covered in marine life. Chuuk is in the middle of Micronesia. It's in the middle of the Pacific. It is a place, I mean, you go to the other islands nearby to reef dive. It just happens that we're reef diving on a wreck. So even if you think, oh, I don't really like wreck diving, I don't want to spend a whole week wreck diving, there's so much more because the wrecks have become these amazing reefs. And I really love how sort of the ocean has decorated these war graves. I mean, the ocean has taken these metal bits of destruction and death and sort of covered them with soft corals and fish life and sea fans, and I find it really beautiful. I think it's really amazing, and it's a very unique and interesting place that I'm excited to get back to. We also have a fantastic crew. I'm a little biased for my crew, but these are some of my dive guides. Maybe kayaking isn't their strong point, but we always have at least 4 dive guides on for any trip. So we're never sending, 16 people with 1 dive guide into a wreck. We group people in small groups. And it's also good, again, if like these 2 people want to go do an engine room tour and these 2 people want to go look at fish life and reef life or whatever, we'll just give you 2 guides, and these guys can go do what they want and these guys can do what they want. So even if there's people in your group that are at sort of different levels and different sort of what they want to see on the wreck, it's super easy for us to do whatever it is you want to do and make the most out of your trip. We're also very laid back in how we're diving. There's no bells going off at 8:15 that you've got to dive at 8:15. We get to a dive site in the morning. I'll give a briefing on the wreck, tell you where to go, what to see, and then I'll tell you when the Odyssey is going to depart that site. So most of the time it's from like 8 a.m. until 12 o'clock lunchtime or 12:30 lunchtime, and you can dive however you want during that time period. If you want to sleep in and take the first dive off, you can. If you want to do 2 dives, you can. If you're a rebreather diver and you want to do a 3-hour dive, you can do that as well. It's just an open deck policy, so let us know where you want to go, if you want a dive guide, and we'll make all that happen for you however and wherever you want to dive. So some other photos. If you ever check the weather reports, it always says 99 chance of rain, and it generally does rain at some point every day, but that just means that we get lots of rainbows every day, and it keeps the islands lovely and green. That's me driving the boat with a remote as well. So that's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the talk. If you have any questions, truckodyssey.com is our website. My website is Brandy Underwater. I'm on all the Instagram and Facebook too. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I love talking about diving or wrecks or whatever, so feel free to send me a message. And I think that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Brandy. We've been watching all the chat box and everything else, and you've got so many comments. You'll have to kind of read them later, but you've got so many, how many people are talking about how much they enjoyed it, what a fantastic presentation this was, how beautiful your photos and your footage are. So everybody really, really enjoyed it. So thank you for that, and I wanted you to know. Everyone, real quick, we'll open this up to questions, but for those of you that are following on, we have one more presentation this evening. It was originally scheduled at 7, but the next presenter is running about 5-10 minutes late. So that gives us plenty of time here for questions. So don't feel like you've got to jump off this one to be able to make the 7 p.m. We have time to sit here and hang out with Brandy. So if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hands in the chat box, type it in the chat box or in the Q&A. Bill Weber, you have a question and you are unmuted. So if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question. I believe he is.
He's unmuted on our end, but he's got to unmute his own microphone.
Okay, so Bill, you need to unmute your microphone. In the meantime, do we have Eric Denson? Eric has a question too. Carrie, do we have Eric unmuted?
Yep, he's got to unmute on his end too. Oh, there he goes.
Yes, hi. First of all, I'd like to say what a fantastic presentation. I'm ready to jump on a plane and go there right now. So this is definitely going to be added to my bucket list. This is one of the best webinars presentations I've seen. I was just curious of all the wrecks that you mentioned, and there were some great wrecks there. How many of them are within, and which ones are within recreational diving limits?
So all of the wrecks that we do during our normal 7-day charter, except the San Francisco, is within recreational dive depth to some extent. There's a couple that maybe part of the wreck is a little bit deeper than 130, but all the wrecks that we do in a normal charter, you can see plenty and experience plenty within that 130-foot range. up until the San Fran. And then the San Fran is really, it's an optional dive. So Saturday morning we start early and we first go to a wreck that's the normal depths. And then we go to the San Fran for those who want to dive the San Fran. And then we move to another wreck. So you don't miss any dives if you don't want to do the deep one. But yeah, I mean, like the Shinkoku starts at 15 feet at one mast and then goes down to 135, 140 at the very stern. But it's a 463-foot wreck. So you could do numerous dives. I mean, you could stay at 40 feet on the deck of the bow for hours and be happy. So it's kind of however you want to experience it.
Yeah, and that's great. Thank you so much because originally I've been diving for almost 30 years. And originally, you know, when I first started diving, you know, Truck Lagoon was always one of those things. Oh, you got to be a technical diver. You got to maybe train to be rebreather or, you know, saturation diving, that type of thing. But obviously, that's not the case. So, and my wife is a diver too as well. And, you know, so this looks like something that's great. And thank you again. I'm putting it on my list. I'm trying to do it next year or the year after and plan a good trip.
Fabulous. Thanks.
I'm just going to pop in there and say this is personally like if we were going to send you to Truck Lagoon, there's other ways to do it, but I'm just going to shamelessly say that this is the way you should do it. So Eric, if you're looking to do this and have a really fabulous vacation, and as I said, we have different ways to get you there, but I'm just going to shamelessly endorse it right now that Odyssey is the way to go for the ultimate experience out in truck. So
I got it written down.
Thanks. Okay, so Bill Weber doesn't have a working mic. So Bill asked, are the wrecks all considered graves?
Ooh, I'm gonna say yes. They are all they're all protected. They all are of historical significance, and the majority of them, to my knowledge, I would say almost all of them are graves. A lot of the remains have been removed by the Japanese. Over the years, they've come out to Chuuk, and they do a really interesting ceremony. It's called a Shinto ceremony. So they've collected a lot of the remains, and then they do a ceremony that, I'm going to get this wrong because I only know what people have told me, but that sort of releases the souls from that area, and then they take them back to Japan, and then they do another ceremony that brings them home. So a lot of the remains have been removed. There are still some remains, and I deeply ask that everyone is very, very respectful of those when they see them. But a lot of them, especially on the shallower wrecks, have been removed already.
Hi, Brandy, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, all right. You cut out for a second there. You froze, so we was worried we lost you. Thank you. Bill, did that? If you have anything further that didn't answer, please type it in the chat box, and we'll ask Brandy to elaborate. But I think that was a pretty thorough answer. Debbie Miller, you're unmuted.
Hi, Brandy. Thank you so much. I've been out to truck at least 3 times, but the last time is probably not going on more like 10, 15 years ago. How much is the deterioration in some of the wrecks? Are they collapsed? Are the infrastructures collapsing, or is it just small parts?
It's different on different wrecks, and because I didn't get to dive it 15 years ago, I can't say exactly what has all changed. The Fujikawa engine room fell in 2014. That was one of the major collapses that happened. And it was actually sort of, it collapsed once and sort of blocked off a lot of stuff, and then it collapsed again, which then opened up to where the machine shop is, and you can still get into the engine room. I'm not a big fan of getting down there. But on the Shinkoku, the wheelhouse, the top is sort of collapsed in, but you can still see the telegraphs. So there's still plenty there, but things are changing a little bit. But not, there's still tons of stuff that is intact and you can get to. So,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a great trip down memory lane.
Oh, good. Thanks. come back out.
Yes, I have to now.
And now you can tell me, you can be like, well, this changed and this changed. But yeah, there's still tons that's great and good to dive. Most of it, all of it.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? If you do, please, as I said, put them in the chat box or raise your hands or on the Q&A. Otherwise, we are set for now. I'll give you a couple of minutes. As I said, our next presenter is running a few minutes late, so we'll probably kick off right around 7:10. So it gives you a chance to grab a cocktail, hit the bathroom, have a snack. I did want to say to Brandy, just she hasn't mentioned it. I mentioned it at the beginning, but I am very appreciative of her presentation. So, and of course, with this topic, obviously, this is something a lot of us are very interested in. So she has a book called The Airplane Graveyard. Brandy, you're welcome to briefly tell us if you like a little bit about it. Otherwise, you know, definitely please check that out, because obviously it's a topic that is very dear to everyone's hearts here.
Oh, sure. Thanks so much. Yeah, I have a book. It's called The Airplane Graveyard. I wonder if I probably have a photo here. I do. It's about World War II American airplanes that were dumped at the end of World War II. So you see a lot of that happening in different places where the war was over and they just discarded everything instead of bringing it back to the U.S. And with, you know, it's about 150 airplanes that were dumped. So to bring all those airplanes back to the U.S. would have taken a lot of ships and a lot of space. And really, they just wanted to get the troops home. The war was over. So yeah, in the northern part of Kwajalein Atoll, they packed all these planes up on barges and pushed them off the back. And they range from about 30 feet to about 130 feet. There's 7 different types of airplanes in the graveyard. And the book talks about each of the types of airplanes. I paired up with Alan Axelrod, who is a World War II historian, and he sort of brings in a lot of information about what each type of plane did in the Pacific theater of the war. And I lived in Kwajalein Atoll. I was working as a civilian contractor for the Army out there for 3 years. So I talk a little bit about Kwajalein and living on the islands and driving a boat out there. And then also there was also a World War II battle. So there's ships there as well. I talk a little bit about those. So yeah, it's available on Amazon, or if you send me an email, I can mail you a copy if anybody's interested. But yeah, talks about another island just a little ways away from Chuuk.
Thanks, Brandy. And I guess we do have a couple more questions. Dave Wyatt, you're unmuted.
Yes, you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation about the airfields being hit first. Is there anything that's above the water line that you guys take a look at while we're out there visiting?
So the Betty Bomber is very close to Ettin Island, so we moor there, and you can see Ettin Island. There's no like parts of planes or anything left on the island. I believe it's Blue Lagoon Resort, which has built, there's kind of a pavilion there, and then the day boats, when they go diving, they'll go and have lunch there. The runway is mostly covered in trees and grass and things like that. So on the Odyssey, we don't make that trip, but if you spend a couple extra days and do one of the land-based day boat tours or something, they usually stop there. But you can see it from our boat while we're diving the Betty, and we're quite close at the Fujikawa as well. But there's not really much, I mean, as far as like to go look at World War II remains, there isn't a lot to my knowledge on the island. They just go and have lunch there now.
Yeah, as I said, a lot of jungle growth. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Eric, you have your question, and then we're going to have to go. I know this is a fabulous topic. So, Eric, are you there? You were unmuted.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I was just wondering, with some of the research you're doing in the Pacific, are you doing that with NOAA? We've done some work with NOAA documenting various World War II aircraft. And I was just curious, because I know they were doing some work in the Pacific, if you were working with NOAA.
I personally am not, and I haven't done any research with any groups or anything like that. the book that I wrote was just from me living there and diving the plains and then looking at other historical research to learn more about why they were there and things like that. But there are several projects that are looking for plains, both in Kwajalein, and then of course it was Project Recover, I'm pretty sure is what it's called, that found the 3 plains recently. And if you Google that, it gives more information about what they found, which is very recent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And again, a fabulous presentation. I loved it.
Thank you.